I am here to show you all of the things that you may need when you're getting ready to do a professional paint project as a professional or unprofessional. We use a lot of different brushes as painters. A lot of oil-based paints, you're gonna use a boar bristle brush or something that's a natural bristle brush because it's easier to work with oil-based. But there are a lot of different companies that make a Nylox or a nylon bristle, which they're usually kind of orange in color, and they're easy to clean with oil-based paints also, versus when you get something like this, which is a thinner bristle, usually this is for latex. Prepare yourself to have quite a bit of paint thinner if you're using an oil-based brush. Once it's cleaned, we'll take it and we'll put it back in the brush cover, and because it holds the form of the brush a lot better, and you actually don't really have to let it dry. We usually take the brush and then we put it back in the cover, seal it up, and then when you store it, just store it like this. These brushes that are 3-inch and flat brushes are really great for exterior paint. It holds more paint and it's easier in siding and things like that to keep a straight edge, versus a brush that is thinner and smaller, holds less paint, and it's easier for things that are detail oriented where you don't want to be as messy. Let's talk about naps. Beyond brushes, naps are going to be the second most useful thing that you use. They come in pretty much 3 sizes. You've got a 4-inch nap, you've got an 18-inch nap, and then you've got a 9-inch nap. I would say that the most used would be the 9-inch, just because it seems to be the typical one that people go towards. As professional painters, we tend to use an 18-inch or a 4-inch more than we ever use a 9-inch nap, because most of the time, if you're painting a large space, an 18-inch nap takes up the whole area, so you're only gonna have to go through 2 or 3 different passes, versus if you use a 9-inch, you're looking at 5 or 6 to take up a space, like a 12-inch ceiling. If you're using thick paint, you want to use something that is a thicker nap. So for instance, this is a 1/2-inch nap. It's spreading the thicker paint more easily, versus if you have something like this, which is a 3/4-inch nap, it is going to have a smoother finish for paint that is not as thick. So if you're ever rolling a clear coat or something with a higher sheen, you want to use something that is a 3/4 nap. There are a lot of different nap options. The safest thing for you to go with is a 3/8 nap. If you're gonna have a heavier paint or you wanna only do 1 coat, which I don't usually recommend, you wanna use something like a 1/2-inch nap, because it's gonna hold more paint and put a thicker coat. I like microfiber naps because I think that they are easy to clean. I think that they always put a smooth finish, and you don't really have to worry about there being as much of that texture left on the wall, even when you're using an eggshell paint. A nap like this I really like because it's loose and it holds the paint, but it also releases the paint well. This is a paint grid. So you're gonna take your roller grid and you're gonna just place it in your bucket. I recommend putting it in before you put the paint in the bucket, so you're not gonna wanna put it in the same bucket as the paint that you're using. You'll wanna get an empty bucket. I usually just take an old bucket, take the wrapping off of it, clean it out, and then you're good to go. You'll place the grid into the bucket and it just sits inside underneath the little ledge. And then you're gonna take your mini roller after you've poured the paint in. I never would go above 1/2 of the gallon of paint, because then you're gonna start getting into getting all the paint down here and on your hand, and that's very frustrating. So when you're done, you can leave it in there by resting it on this little ledge. There's a little notch that sits so that you're not dunking it into the paint. You'll basically just take the paint and you'll roll it in on the grid, and it pushes the paint off of the roller nap back into there. And then it's really nice because you can just take your grid out, put the lid back on, and then you have a place to store it. You walk into the sandpaper aisle and there are so many different grits of sandpaper. You go from 60 grit, which is super, super rough, to 400, 600, 800 grit, which are super, super smooth. A rule of thumb that I have is you pretty much always have 180 and 220 on you, just period. Anytime there's a wood surface that you're preparing, you're gonna need 180 and 220. When you get into things like clear coats and fine finishes or high glosses. Anything that's not just a latex paint on trim, you're gonna wanna get into something that's a little bit higher, like a 320, which is what I would use when I'm finishing a door for sanding in between clear coats. And sometimes I would even go up to a 400. But just for everyday sanding trim, getting ready to paint, I would use 180 or 220. So one thing you also want to remember is if you do need to use a super heavy grit sandpaper, you're always going to want to go back with a higher grit sandpaper to smooth it out. A lot of what I do is I get a full piece of sandpaper and then I'll fold the sandpaper into squares, because it's easier to get into the fine areas, and then you can get into places that are harder to like sand with a sanding block. I'll refold it, I'll fold it around, I'll do all these different things so that I can utilize the most out of the sandpaper and not waste it. Painter's tape is the #1 thing that we use in the industry. I spend more money on this than anything else. We use it for everything. We use it to mask, we use it on rollers to clean them, we use it on brushes to keep the paint from dripping down. There are a lot of different types of tape, but what you really want to pay attention to is if it says it's for walls, if it says it's for masonry. If specifically on stone and plaster and brick, we use masonry tape, which is a little bit more tacky, so it sticks to those surfaces. Another item is a hand masker. So you can keep pulling it, it'll keep taking the tape out, and then as soon as you go and you're done and you have the piece that you need, you'll take this, you'll rip it, and then you're ready to put it on whatever surface that you need to do it. You can use tape and you can wrap the tape around the nap, and then after you wrap it, you're just gonna take the tape and peel it off again. And it'll make it so that if there's any loose fuzz or any dust or anything like that, it'll come off on the tape. It'll make it so that there's no dust, no fuzz left. I hope that everything I've talked about is super helpful. The key points are you can help keep your space clean. It makes it easier for yourself. Using high quality materials actually makes a difference. It's gonna be able to last for a longer time and you're gonna enjoy it much better.